A passenger aircraft is gutted, but the machine isn't being decommissioned. The aircraft is undergoing a special conversion before beginning its second life as a cargo jet. Dresden is home to the XXL workshop that performs such high-tech modifications. When a 20-year-old Airbus is to be converted into a transport aircraft, the aeronautical engineers from EFW are the leading specialists worldwide. In just a few months, 600 men and women will transform a passenger jet into a long-haul cargo plane. Dresden International Airport, in the heart of Saxony. Home to a huge aircraft workshop. On the 250,000 square meter site with its 3 giant hangars, the specialists exclusively convert models from the Airbus family. Since 2017, they've also been converting A330 models into cargo planes. In the early hours of the morning, a new project for the conversion specialists appears on the horizon. This A330 passenger jet arriving from Bangkok is to be converted into a cargo plane over the next few months. The mechanics seal off almost all of the windows in the passenger cabin with aluminum panels. The body of the Airbus is cut open in 2 stages and fitted with a new strengthened skin. The men and women then install an enormous cargo door and swap out 50 frames in the interior. This is followed by a sturdy floor construction. The modern cargo loading system is later installed on the top. Then, a hermetic smoke curtain and a gigantic cargo restraining net are fitted. The Thai long-haul aircraft is first met by the ground crew. The men bring a generator, the so-called ground power, into position. It supplies the plane with power while it's parked. When they attach the cables, the supervisors notice a lot of smoke coming from the right landing gear. A fire close to the fuel tanks can quickly turn into an inferno. They immediately alert the airport fire department. The firefighters arrive in full strength within a few minutes and take charge of the situation. It turns out nothing needs to be extinguished. The suspected fire is just the result of heavy braking.
It's not exactly the youngest of aircraft. Maybe they underestimated the length of the runway and braked a bit too hard. It's rare, but it sometimes happens that the hydraulic oil then starts to smoke. It was nothing serious, though.
The fire engine drives off. Inside the plane, the 7-strong crew from Thailand pack their bags. It's time to say farewell. The A330-300 has served as a passenger aircraft in Asia for almost 20 years. It has around 65,000 flight hours on the clock.
From what I've heard, her most recent flights were between Bangkok and Phuket. That's a trip of just 1 or 2 hours. She flew a total of 6 times a day. These machines are really intended for 10 to 11-hour flights.
3, 2, 1, action.
After a final souvenir photo, the pilots head to their hotel and the ground crew gets back to work. The team first has to reposition the 60-meter-long airplane. They move the 6-meter-high passenger steps to one side to make way for this powerful machine. The 490-horsepower, 15-ton pushback tractor can move airplanes weighing up to 300 tons. The driver maneuvers toward the nose gear and lifts it 30 centimeters into the air with a hydraulic scoop. Now he has the machine under control and reverses it out of the parking position. The procedure is called pushback. There are two main variants of the Airbus A330. At around 64 meters in length, the 300 version is nearly 6 meters longer than the 200 version and can carry up to 440 passengers. Since 1992, Airbus has delivered almost 1,500 of these popular aircraft. After many years of service as a passenger jet, some of them land here, at the Elbe Flugzeugwerke. Now, the recent arrival from Thailand is first scrutinized by the EFW management. 2 months earlier, the German aeronautical engineers traveled to Bangkok and spent 2 weeks testing the machine. The owner was able to repair all the defects, and 14 days ago, following another inspection, the parties sealed the deal. The men now check whether the machine has suffered new damage or changes have been made since then. So far, things look good, and there's nothing preventing the conversion to a cargo plane from going ahead.
This A330-300 will go through our so-called passenger-to-freighter conversion. That means we take the passenger aircraft that we can see from the identification plate was built by Airbus 19 years ago, and over the next few months turn it into a cargo plane. The plane has just been received. We're currently running through the acceptance procedure with the former owner before ownership is transferred to us, and we can get started with the conversion.
A total of 1,600 men and women work in the Elbe Flugzeugwerke hangars. The conversion will give the old machines up to 30% more cargo space and reduce fuel consumption per ton of payload by 20%. The most significant modification to the aircraft structure is the installation of the large cargo door. This new opening in the fuselage will later be used for loading the transport containers. Before the cargo door can be installed, the conversion specialists surround every A330 with scaffolding. This is the only way the workers will be able to reach every part of the 17-meter-high machine. The workers use an angle grinder to cut through the up to 8 millimeter thick aluminum skin. The reinforcement of the airframe surrounding the new cargo door is installed in 2 stages. So the airplane does not collapse on itself, the mechanics first replace the entire roof section. Once everything has been riveted together, the fuselage is sufficiently stable again, and they can replace the lower section. An internal frame stabilizes the airframe. It counteracts the forces that develop when the massive roof section is removed and act on the severed formers. A 30 square meter section of airplane skin floats through the hangar. The part will be recycled later. The brand new roof structures have superior mechanical properties and are better suited structurally to transfer the forces generated in the area of the new cargo door when loading the huge containers into the fuselage. The crane operator carefully maneuvers the new section through the huge hangar. His colleagues on the roof of the Airbus take delivery of the bulky segment and with precision guide it into the opening. It takes the specialists 3 days to cut open the fuselage and install the 2 new structural elements. A team of technicians immediately goes to work. They strengthen and replace the aluminum supports surrounding the new entrance. The men completely replace up to 50 of the cut formers and cross members.
The forces created as a result of cutting the larger opening for the cargo door have to be transferred somewhere. So the areas in front and just behind the cargo door are massively reinforced with doublers in order to strengthen the entire fuselage. The formers are replaced as well in order to ensure that the weight is evenly distributed throughout the fuselage. If that wasn't done, it would collapse in on itself.
A sturdy base frame, which will later support up to 62 tons of freight, separates the upper deck from the cargo hold. The aluminum construction forms the foundation for the modern loading system. Next, the workers install the 600-kilogram cargo door. The prominent cargo hatch is a fundamental component of every transport aircraft. Its hydraulic system will open and close it thousands of times over the next 20 years. The green color of the corrosion protection indicates the true scale of the modification. The conversion experts have replaced almost 60 square meters of aircraft skin. The machine that recently arrived from Bangkok has yet to undergo this drastic procedure. The holiday plane from Thailand is first made ready for its conversion in front of the hangar doors. A worker places red protective covers on all the parts that protrude from the fuselage. Now the antennas, probes, and sensors on the outer skin can no longer injure the workers. A worker opens the landing gear door on the underside. The A330 has a total of 8 doors, some of which are intended as emergency exits. A colleague takes a sample of the hydraulic fluid to determine its quality. During operation, the oil shoots through the pipes at a pressure of 3,000 psi or 200 bar and can get heavily contaminated due to erosion.
A sample must be taken from every hydraulic system before we allow it into our hydraulic pumping equipment. If the hydraulic fluid has been in the system for a while, it no longer has the properties it ought to, so we play it safe. This will be sent to the lab to make sure that the properties are still acceptable.
The workers pump out all of the hydraulic systems in the aircraft so that they can carry out maintenance or conversion work on the lines later on. Testing the fluid samples prevents the pumping vehicles and thus other aircraft from being contaminated. The 3 fuel tanks in the wings and fuselage are still full as well. The technician reads off the quantity and location of the remaining aviation fuel from the complex fuel gauge.
A total quantity of 10.8 tons, and this here's the unit, kilograms in this case, but it can vary depending on airline. It's very important to get that right since it's been the cause of a lot of errors. And these are the individual tanks. Inner tank, outer tank. Center tank is practically empty. It's too small an amount to get out.
The technician uses a cherry picker to reach the underside of the left wing. He takes a dozen fuel samples from all the tanks via valves in the outer skin of the A330. The analysis of these samples will decide the fate of the remaining 10 tons of aviation fuel. If everything is okay, the worker will pump out the fuel and use it to fill other aircraft. If not, the fuel must be disposed of.
This is a fuel sample. We take it to test whether there's water or impurities in the tank, primarily in the form of microbes. This prevents the gas truck used to pump out the fuel from getting contaminated. And if there are problems, it can be handled in the workshop. It then has to be treated with chemicals. Or if it contains water, it has to be drained off from below.
An hour later, the technician has taken all the samples and takes the bottles to the lab. Depending on type and configuration, an Airbus A330-300 can have up to 440 seats. The 19-year-old aircraft furnishings have endured several million passengers and their luggage. The last of today's guests are these 30 boxes, without whose contents the plane is not allowed to take off.
The plane is changing its home address and switching owners, and the documentation changes owner along with the aircraft. We have here around 15 meters of aircraft documentation. The files document the entire lifetime of an aircraft, which will be audited by an independent third party, a so-called CAMO, who will then issue a certificate. The airline can then be sure that the files are complete and the aircraft is airworthy.
Like the vehicle registration document for a car, the aircraft documents contain, among other things, all technical modifications and changes made to the machine. Numerous entries will be added over the course of the conversion in Dresden. During the transformation from passenger jet to cargo plane, the engines often play a special role. In the case of the Thai machine, the engines will be removed and sent back to Bangkok. They will either remain in the possession of the Asian airline or, since they are often only leased, returned to the airline's leasing partner. The specialists at EFW then use their global network to source suitable engines. The demand for second-hand components has risen sharply in recent years, due in particular to the air freight sector.
As it stands right now, around 2/3 of all cargo aircraft are converted cargo aircraft. You have to imagine an aircraft of this size costs around $200 million new, and a conversion like this costs roughly $18 million. So it's an attractive alternative for large companies like FedEx, UPS, DHL, who fly 3-, 4-, 5-hour routes within their networks. A new aircraft doesn't make sense for them, as it wouldn't be financially viable due to the short operating times.
The age of the machine is not particularly important for the conversion. A 20-year-old A330 is perfectly suitable for conversion. The converted Airbus could go into service here in just 6 months. Leipzig-Halle Airport is one of the most important logistic hubs for air freight traffic. Around the clock, 7 days a week, 150,000 packages are processed here each hour and flown to 50 destinations in Europe, Asia, and America. The loadmasters and their teams have to work quickly. With their high loaders, they can reach the cargo doors of the different types of freighter without any problem. Here, a Boeing 757 is being unloaded. With this model, the workers pull the containers through the fuselage to the cargo hatch by hand. In the case of a converted Airbus A330, this will be done automatically. The workers use the high loader to bring the containers to ground level, always under time pressure.
We're always working against the clock. We see the time countdown up there. For a 757, for example, we have 30 minutes to unload, and then the shipments have to go to the terminal.
Nowadays, there are 2 ways for freight to travel by air: as a belly load in the hold of a passenger aircraft, or in the containers of a cargo plane. More than 5 million tons of goods are transported like this to and from Germany each year. The small cargo crew often travels around the whole world in just a few days. This crew is flying to Tokyo. Not much happens on board during the long-haul flight, because containers don't drink and don't eat, and as the freight pilots like to joke, containers don't throw up.
Die Flugzeit ist relativ kurz heute.
The flight time is relatively short today. We have a flight time of 9 hours and 54 minutes due to very strong tailwinds en route.
48 Stunden in
After spending 48 hours in Tokyo, we're flying on to Hong Kong. Then, after a further 24 hours, we're heading to Saigon. And after another 24 hours, flying from Saigon to Frankfurt.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
The crew lands the Boeing in Tokyo without applause. Thanks to globalization and worldwide online commerce, the logistics industry is booming. The demand for transport aircraft is rising steadily. When it comes to intercontinental trade, cargo jets are not only the fastest mode of transport, their freight is usually more valuable too. In Germany, a ton of air freight is worth 86,000 euros on average, and thus 30 times more than one transported by road. And compared to rail transport, a ton in a cargo plane is 62 times more valuable. Back in Dresden, in front of the hangars, a team is working on the two engines of the Thai plane. The airline is keeping the turbines, so they're being removed. First, the 5 men remove the cowling sections so that they can later disconnect all the supply lines from the engine. They lift the enormous air inlet cowl off the engine with the crane. The fan, which is nearly 3 meters in diameter, is now exposed. The removed cowling sections are carefully placed in the hangar. A jet engine is one of the most expensive airplane components. A new turbine for an Airbus 330 costs up to $37 million. Once the mechanics have removed all of the structures that are in the way, the true complexity of the Pratt & Whitney turbofan engine is revealed. All of the connections to the aircraft must be disconnected prior to removal.
There's the fuel system. We have the hydraulic lines. There are 3 hydraulic systems in the aircraft. 2 of the systems are fed by the left engine. The ventilation system that supplies air to the cabin. There's a separate fire extinguishing system. That is to be disconnected too. Other than that, there's electrical connectors, of course, and a generator cable. The engine is now hanging by 8 bolts. The bolts are still in place. 2 here, 2 on the opposite side. The forward mount is here at the front, again with 2 bolts on the left and 2 on the right-hand side.
In order to detach the 6-ton turbine in a controlled manner, the workers first connect these orange-colored support arms to the wing and position a mobile steel cradle beneath the engine. The men now attach 4 heavy-duty chain hoists to the arms and hook the ends onto the steel cradle. They tension the chain using enormous ratchets and slowly lift the transport cradle into position. Detaching an engine requires the utmost of precision.
3 millimeters still contact.
Okay.
Once the cradle is in position, it's securely bolted to the turbine. Over the past 2 hours, the 5-strong crew has constructed what amounts to a second engine mount beneath the left wing. Only now can they loosen the 8 locking bolts and then separate the original connection to the wing. The 30 million euro engine now hangs by just the 4 chain hoists. But nothing can happen anymore. as each individual chain would be able to hold the engine. The men carefully lower the assembly onto the mobile carriage frame.
Fits on my side.
After a good 3 hours, one of the 2 turbofan engines has been removed and will be temporarily stored in the hangar. If it passes EFW's technical inspections, it can be transported back to Thailand in a few weeks. This A330-200 in Hangar 2 was fitted with its new cargo door weeks ago. The technicians are currently busy in the fuselage of the machine, reinforcing the airframe. The work on the skeleton of the future freighter is extremely important for ensuring that in its new life, the Airbus will be able to cope with the forces in flight. The containers on board the machine won't be able to enjoy the view, however, as the workers are sealing off 94 of the windows.
Container schauen nicht zum Fenster raus, wir brauchen die grundsätzlich nicht.
Containers don't look out the window, so we don't really need any. But the main reason is that windows have to be regularly inspected, and sealing them makes the inspection intervals normally required for passenger windows unnecessary. It's likely that passenger aircraft won't have any windows at all in the future. They'll have digital displays instead, which will make the engineers happy, as they generally don't like the fact that holes are cut in aircraft, thus weakening the plane in these areas.
In order to seal the openings, this technician prepares the seal of the dummy window with a cord. The oval fitting is made of milled aluminum and is thus exceptionally light and especially low maintenance. Once the dummy is placed in the opening, the worker attaches a sealing collar. His colleague outside then pulls the cord out. In this way, the rubber lip of the seal slides into the right position. The men secure the collar in place, alternately tightening the screws with 1.5 Newton-meters of torque. After 20 minutes, one of the 94 portholes is now tightly sealed.
Some of the windows, like this one here, are left clear so that during flight, the crew can take a look at the flaps or the engines in an emergency. If the instruments in the cockpit fail, they can check if everything is okay from here.
During flight, it's extremely cold outside behind the sealed windows, as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius. To prevent moisture in the warmer interior of the aircraft forming too much condensation, insulating mats like these are used to even out the temperature gradient. When the A330 was gutted, all the insulation was removed and now is being refitted following the structural modifications.
So we're now trying to adapt the existing insulating mats to the new structures in the plane, like brackets and fasteners, and make sure everything's okay and works properly.
The men and women from EFW install up to 1,000 square meters of the flame-retardant insulating mats in an Airbus during conversion. At a cruising altitude of over 12,000 meters and an airspeed of 900 kilometers an hour, the fuselage of the jet is subjected to enormous forces. The pressure difference between the cabin and the outside world is so high that the entire structure of the plane expands. And then there's the thousands of takeoffs and landings after 20 years of service. These stresses leave their mark on any machine. Thanks to meticulous material testing, the engineers in Dresden regularly discover tiny cracks in the structure. Here, by the back door, the workers are replacing an entire former for this very reason.
A door opening is a huge hole in the structure, which is why there are massive milled formers here. And as a result of the numerous takeoffs and landings, the plane is already 15 or 20 years old, small cracks have developed here in 2 drill holes. They were discovered during X-ray or eddy current testing. That is why this section of former, from about here to roughly a foot down into the cargo hold, is being replaced. This is the old former with the original anti-corrosive coating. This bit that looks new is the replacement former.
So that nothing deforms in the door area over the next 20 years while the aircraft is in service, the technicians joined the old former with the new one using a coupler. They connect the bridge between the elements with 50 special rivets.
When the tightening torque is reached, the hex nut simply breaks off. A thing like this costs several dollars.
Replacing such an important structural element as a door frame takes the 2 men up to 2 weeks. Dresden has a long aviation tradition with an eventful history. Following the Second World War, the Klötzsche Air Force Base and Military Air Base 38 gave rise to Dresden Airport, and with it, the Saxonian aviation industry.
The conditions exist in the German Democratic Republic for the construction of high-performance aircraft. A modern and efficient state-owned aircraft industry was established.
In 1955, the Flugzeugwerke Dresden was founded. This simultaneously marked the start of passenger aircraft construction. Within 3 years, the workforce had grown to 25,000 men and women. It was best known for mass-producing the Ilyushin IL-14P, a Soviet short and medium-haul airliner that could carry 26 passengers. The Ilyushin was powered by 2 Schwersoff 14-cylinder radial engines. By the end of 1958, 80 of the Russian propeller-driven aircraft had been built in Dresden.
And the hangar doors open once again, a new model. The medium-range jet airplane B-152 is rollout ready and is handed over for ground testing.
The socialist prestige object B-152 took to the world stage in 1958. It was the first German jet-engined passenger aircraft developed in the 1950s, making it the GDR's most important aviation project.
The recoil of the gases ejected at high speeds generates forward thrust.
Tragically, the project sealed the fate of aircraft construction in a centrally planned economy. Due to delays in development, and just a year following the B-152's launch, the USSR declared that it had no intention of purchasing the passenger airliner. The Big Brother closed his checkbook and backed out. On February 28, 1961, the Politburo of the East German Communist Party decided to completely cease aircraft production in the GDR due to it being uneconomical. From now on, Dresden focused on maintaining the aircraft of the Warsaw Pact and National People's Army. Between 1961 and 1990, over 2,000 Soviet MiG fighters and 300 helicopters were serviced here. Legends were nonetheless created at the VEB Flugzeugwerft. The aeronautical engineering knowledge gained over many years flowed into a top-secret East German project. The test facilities and the material testing methods in particular helped the regime achieve worldwide fame. From 1976, bobs were developed and fabricated in Saxony under the strictest of secrecy. The blue sports sleds from Dresden won the GDR squad 13 gold, 15 silver, and 10 bronze medals at World Championships and Olympic Games. In 1990, the Elbe Flugzeugwerke was founded. One of its specialist areas is still converting Airbus passenger aircraft into cargo planes. The A330-300 from Thailand is about to enter the next phase of its conversion. The plane flew in from Bangkok yesterday. After extensive technical tests, the aviation specialists removed and stored both of the turbofan engines. Over the next 15 weeks, the 19-year-old holiday jet will be transformed into a modern cargo plane. The first cargo aircraft converted in Dresden left the hangar in November 1996. Then, the A310-200 went to the U.S. company FedEx. Inside the aircraft, a dozen cabin technicians have taken over. They dismantle the galleys, toilets, seats, and all the fittings and fixtures. Outside, the men maneuver an enormous high loader into position. With the help of the XL elevator, they bring the heavy airplane inventory from 6 meters up down to ground level. The biggest job is removing the nearly 400 seats of the A330. The men perform the laborious task of dismantling the seat rows by hand.
At the end of the day, it's the customer's property. The customer or owner, which is often a leasing company, decides what happens with the fittings. In most cases, at least, the economy class seats are scrapped. The same applies to the toilets, galleys, etc. Business class seats are sometimes taken back, refurbished and reused.
In the economy section, the technicians have unbolted all the seats from the cabin floor and disconnected the electrical systems. They carry the aircraft furniture by hand through the narrow aisles and onto the high loader. Once on the ground, 2 men load the aircraft seats into containers. The Thai interior will be professionally scrapped in the next few weeks. After 3 hours of hard work, economy class is standing room only. The next job for the dismantling crew is gutting the passenger cabin. The men and women remove all the interior trim. Hundreds of ventilation grills, side panels, ceiling panels, and the carpet are stripped out. The cabin fittings will either be scrapped or also sent back to Thailand.
Next, we have to remove the ceiling panels so that we can access the electrical systems and the mountings for the overhead storage compartments.
The team of aircraft technicians stores the dismantled trim parts in the aircraft for the time being, in order to not falsify the weight of the machine when it's weighed later. The workers gradually reveal the complex electronic network of the A330 in the ceiling and sidewalls.
Some of the cables are reused, and many cables, like those for the entertainment system, are just not needed anymore. A cargo plane doesn't need to play films during flight.
It takes 20 workdays to completely remove all of the interior parts, such as the seats, toilets, and galleys, as well as the trim panels, luggage bins, and insulating mats. The conversion of the main deck is without doubt the biggest modification. Where 400 passengers once sat, enormous freight containers will soon be automatically maneuvered into position. What makes the loading system special is its floor. It consists of special rollers, casters, and ball bearings. In the hangar, the Airbus is fitted with its new subfloor structure. After the old floor has been dismantled, 2 workers lay the last of the fiberglass panels. First, they apply a sealant to the substructure. Then, they lay the panels like a giant puzzle on the 200 square meter main deck.
It always depends on the type of aircraft. I would say roughly 80 to 100 plates. There are adapter segments in the floor, like this here, where the freight loading system is attached, and on which the containers then roll forwards and backwards.
The floor plates are additionally covered with a rough surface, because containers are loaded in all weather conditions. That's how moisture can easily get into the cargo compartment. The anti-slip coating prevents the personnel from getting injured. In Dresden's cargo jet factory, this converted freighter is about to be subjected to an important test. Just before being delivered, the aircraft builders test the intelligent freight loading system on the main deck of the Airbus. 600 powered rollers and ball bearings are installed in the floor. The men bring a high loader into position in front of the cargo door. It raises the heavy transport container 6 meters into the air. The freight boxes move slowly through the 3-meter wide door into the ball mount area. The loading crew turn the container into the correct position on the distinctive stainless steel balls that give the entrance area its name.
They're ball bearings after all, and you have to remember, it's used in all weather conditions. So if it's raining outside, the water naturally drips off the containers. When it snows in winter, the containers that were standing in the airport may have salt on them. And all of this ends up in the rollers, so they have to be inspected and replaced fairly often too.
In the future, with the new system, loading and unloading the entire cargo area will take just 30 minutes. The powered rollers are networked together and communicate with one another via special software. Sensors scan and weigh the boxes, thereby assisting the loadmaster in charge. Following conversion, the cargo plane will be able to transport a payload of up to 62 tons. In its first life as a passenger airliner, the weight of the passengers was evenly distributed throughout the entire plane. And now, as an air freighter, the plane must be balanced by the loading staff as well.
Wir sehen die einzelnen Stellplatzpositionen, die auch
We can see the individual parking locations, which are crucial for the weight distribution in the aircraft. Different containers and different pallets have different weights. Airplanes must be balanced in flight, and that's what these markings are for. With this cargo loading system, you can move the pallets, and once you've reached the right position, lock them in place. The parking positions are marked on the sides. They're all marked so that when loading the aircraft, the loadmaster knows exactly where each pallet and container goes.
The cockpit is separated from the cargo compartment by a smoke curtain.
If a container is burning, you don't have much chance of extinguishing it, so you have to reduce altitude and naturally land as quickly as possible. During this time, it's critical that no smoke enters the cockpit and that the pilots remain capable of performing their duties at all times. That's what this smoke curtain is for. It can be almost hermetically sealed and so prevents the smoke from escaping out the front.
On the other side of the curtain, a cargo restraint net protects the flight crew from freight that may come loose during an emergency landing.
So if the worst happens, the net will catch the containers. Depending on the force acting on the net, it would then open here to ensure that the flight attendant, sitting here for example, wouldn't be injured by the containers. It would gradually break open these loops here and would eventually come to a halt.
For this conversion, the specialists at EFW have fulfilled a very exclusive wish of the client: a coffee machine for 12,000 euros.
Well, it's the most expensive coffee you can get. Any coffee from a thermos flask is cheaper. You can imagine how much a cup of coffee actually costs when you spend a 5-figure sum for a coffee machine and then work out the number of times it's used.
But then again, each cup of coffee comes with a fantastic view free of charge. After 4 months, the conversion of this passenger jet into a cargo plane is in its final phase. In the cargo hold, the technicians insulate the delicate cable bundles. The avionics, that is, all the electrical and electronic devices and wiring necessary for flight, are enclosed in fireproof mats and installed under the ceiling. Once the last of the maintenance work on the 2 engines of the Airbus A330 has been completed and they're ready for operation, the newborn cargo plane is put on the scales. Or to be more precise, 10 scales, 1 for each wheel. A tow bar tractor maneuvers the heavy machine onto the measuring instruments. To get a correct reading, the men uncouple the tractor and note the result in the log.
We're measuring around 9 to 10 tons on each of the scales for the main wheels. And here in the front, it's less, about 5 tons.
The tractor pulls the plane onto the scales 3 times. The technicians use the results to compute the cargo jet's exact center of gravity. The weight determination is one of the last stations for the new air freighter before being delivered to the customer.
You can clearly see here how much work our staff have put into the conversion. The green sections are the parts we've worked on. The green paint, the corrosion protection, ensures that nothing can corrode until the plane gets its final paint job.
Over the past few months, the conversion specialists from Elbe Flugzeugwerke have pulled off an impressive feat. In 2 stages, they've cut open the fuselage of the Airbus, installed around 60 square meters of new, reinforced aluminum skin, fitted the giant cargo door, replaced 50 formers in the interior, and fitted a robust floor structure on which a modern cargo loading system now sits. And most recently, a hermetic smokescreen and a gigantic cargo restraining net that protects the cockpit and the pilots. For approximately 18 million euros, the aircraft conversion specialists have transformed an outdated passenger jet into a modern freighter. This A330 now takes off again for the first time. It's headed for Great Britain. There, the machine will be completely painted by its new owner and continue flying for the next 2 decades as an air freighter. Logistics companies around the world rely on air freight when valuable goods have to be delivered quickly. For mobile phone manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies in particular, the plane has become the preferred mode of transport. 98% of all smartphones, for instance, arrive in Germany by air freight. Over 100 years ago, on the other hand, the first goods were worth pennies. The air freight industry was born on August 20th, 1911, when an aircraft took off from Johannisthal airfield. On board, it had hot-off-the-press copies of the newspaper Berliner Morgenpost. There were no enormous cargo doors and intelligent cargo loading systems back then. Today, the decks are completely unloaded and loaded with new containers in just 30 minutes. The modern cargo machines then distribute their valuable freight to all corners of the world in a matter of hours. Around 600 employees at the Elbe Flugzeugwerke transform passenger aircraft into efficient transport aircraft. In just 5 to 6 months, a new type of aircraft is created that can start its second life as a cargo plane.